My name is Leo, and I'm currently 28 years old. I live with my mother, just the two of us, since my parents are divorced. My mom has always been a hardworking person. My parents divorced because of my father's infidelity, but it was my father who brought up the divorce, and my mother accepted it. That's why I know that my mother was actually aware of my father's infidelity and endured it for many years. But there was only one reason why she didn't divorce him. She didn't want to take away my father from me. My father was irresponsible with women and, in my opinion, was a terrible husband. However, to me, he was always gentle and warm. So, I've always been a daddy's boy. No matter how much my mother suffered, she always thought of me first and bore that pain alone. That's why I wasn't surprised when I found out they were getting divorced when I was going to high school. Instead, I thought to myself, she's put up with it for so long, quite calmly. My father had a new partner, so he didn't want to take me in. I was a bit shocked by that, but if I had to choose which parent to live with, I think I would have chosen my mother. I'm not sure why, but that's just how I feel. And because my mother was such a determined person, she continued to work hard even after the divorce. I told my mother many times that I would work after graduating from high school, so she didn't need to worry about my tuition. You don't have to worry about tuition. I'll work after I graduate from high school. But my mother had a different opinion.
You might have trouble in the future if you don't graduate from college, so I want to leave as many possibilities open for you, Leo.
And during my 3 years of high school life, she earned the money for my college tuition. However, even after I went to college, my mother's work ethic did not change. And I once spoke to her about it. Aren't you working too hard since you're getting older? But my mother always responded with a cheerful smile.
I'm fine.
So, I never pressed the matter. I had never seen my mother looking unwell since I was born. I always had this idea in my head that my mom was always energetic. But then, something unexpected happened when I was celebrating my 20th birthday. After I finished my college classes, I was working part-time at a bar when the manager told me there was a phone call from someone at my mother's workplace.
Leo, there's a call for you from someone at your mom's job.
I wondered why. At that moment, I had no inkling of worry. I suppose I was too complacent. When I answered the phone, the person from my mother's workplace said,
She missed a step on the stairs and fell from a height. She's unconscious now, at the hospital.
It took me a while to grasp the information. Afterward, I explained the situation to my manager and headed straight to the designated hospital. Whether my mother had hit her head when she fell, what it meant that she was unconscious, what would happen to her. Because of the confusion and unexpected circumstances at that time, my memory is not very clear. But I do remember walking into a hospital room, seeing my mother lying in bed with bandages and tubes attached to her head, looking somehow older than usual, even though she was just sleeping. For the first time, I understood that my mother wasn't always as energetic as she seemed. I felt a fear that my mother might be gone, and my body wouldn't stop shaking. At that moment, the doctor called me into a separate room.
She hit her head pretty hard, so we conducted tests, but there's no danger to her life.
I felt a profound sense of relief upon hearing those words, but there was still one thing bothering me. So why hasn't my mom regained consciousness? I didn't mean to complain to the doctor. It was just a simple question. Then the doctor replied,
The best word to describe her condition is overwork. Her fall down the stairs may have been a result of her becoming anemic from extreme fatigue. Talking with her coworkers, it seems she's been working nonstop. Son, please watch over your mom and make sure she's not pushing herself too hard.
When I first heard my mom had fallen down the stairs, I remember thinking, what a clumsy mistake. But it wasn't as simple as that. She had been working almost alone for nearly 10 years to put me through school and to ensure that I never wanted for anything. All for me. And it felt like her injury was my fault. I decided to contribute more of my earnings to the household expenses and tell mom to cut back on work. I'll help out more with the chores on weekends, I thought, just as the doctor delivered another shocking piece of news.
And she hit her back hard when she fell down the stairs, so there might be difficulty in walking.
I felt like time stopped. According to the doctor, a full assessment would be needed once she regained consciousness, but he said it was likely she would not be able to live without a wheelchair. Just this morning, she was walking around just fine. And from that day on, my mother's life was confined to a wheelchair. We moved from our cramped apartment to a more spacious, handicap-accessible condominium. The expenses were covered by the savings my mother had set aside for my future. I wanted to use it all for her since she had sacrificed even her ability to walk, working for me, always with a smile. That meant more to me than anything else. I managed to balance part-time work and school and even landed a job at my preferred company. During the day, I left mom's care to a home health aide, and after work, I helped with the things she couldn't do alone. There was no time to go out with friends my age or travel, but my days were full. My mom was happy that our time together increased, and I finally felt like I was able to support the mother who had lived for me. That's when the doctor, whom we'd been seeing regularly, told us something we never expected: dementia. Even though mom had always worked, she had become unable to go out in the past few years. Sure, she went for walks with her aide, and I would take her out on my days off. But compared to when she could move on her own, her interactions with others had decreased. That must have advanced her dementia.
We can slow down the progression of her disease, but it will be difficult to significantly improve it.
I couldn't hide my shock at those words. How mom would change, forgetting precious memories, family, even herself. I had seen such scenes on TV, so the thought of my mom forgetting who I was, who she was, terrified me. But there was no time to feel down. My busy days would begin again tomorrow. After that, our hectic schedule continued. I started taking walks with mom twice a day, even before going to work. I made sure we went on a trip once a month and bought lots of books that were said to be good for brain activation. I used to make dinner alone, thinking it would be faster than having mom in her wheelchair do it. But even if it took time, I realized it was better for her to do the tasks, so we began preparing meals together. I had already been avoiding overtime for caregiving reasons, but I started turning it down even more. I knew it caused resentment among my colleagues and superiors, but there was nothing I could do about it. Despite my efforts, mom's symptoms progressed. She would say she wanted coffee even though she had just had some, or forget the name of her aide she saw every day. Mom hadn't forgotten me yet, but the thought that the time might come was terrifying. It happened one day when my immediate supervisor and I were out on a sales call.
Today we're meeting an important client, so please don't be impolite.
This boss, who doesn't like that I always leave on time, rarely talks to me. Yes, the meeting was more nerve-wracking than usual, but everything went smoothly, and we wrapped up the discussion. Thank you for today. We'll be taking our leave now. As my boss and I were about to leave the room, the client CEO addressed us.
What are your plans for the rest of the day?
My boss answered.
We're planning to go straight home today.
It was already 6 o'clock at that point. The company's regular hours end at 5, so we were already 30 minutes into overtime. I need to get home to help mom with dinner preparation. That's what I was thinking after the meeting ended, when an agonizing proposal came.
Why don't you join me for dinner? I think it would be great for building a good relationship for the success of this project.
The client CEO, Mr. Mason, is a genuinely kind person, looking every bit like the CEO but with a friendly attitude and no sense of pressure in a good way. Therefore, I really wanted to go, but I knew I couldn't.
Please, we'd love to join you.
That was my boss next to me.
That's great. What about you, Leo?
Both pairs of eyes turned to me, and I felt pressure from my boss saying, "Don't turn it down." But I said, "I'm truly honored by your invitation and would love to go, but I live with my wheelchair-bound mother. I need to get home to her. I'm really sorry." I declined, and the CEO apologized.
I didn't know that. I'm sorry for the sudden invitation.
In the end, it seemed the CEO and my boss went to dinner, but I went straight home. The next day, I was called in by my boss, who yelled,
"Your attachment to your mother is excessive. What would you do if that ruined our business deal? If you're taking care of her so much, why not just put her in a facility? Don't expect a bonus if you're going to be so self-centered."
I was severely reprimanded, and indeed, my annual evaluation was significantly lowered, and my bonus was cut in half. But honestly, I was reaching my limit to the point where my boss's harassment didn't matter anymore. There was no rest, even when I went home. I wanted to help mom, but I wasn't well liked at work. Every action seemed to be negated by the opposite reaction, and I was lost about what to do. But I couldn't stop. I had always been pretending not to notice. That day was Mom's regular checkup, and I was back at the hospital. Then the doctor said,
Leo, it seems your health isn't great either. Please take care of yourself.
I wondered if I looked so tired that even others could see it. Lost in thought, I was waiting for the prescription in the waiting room when suddenly,
Hey, aren't you?
I heard such a voice and looked in its direction. I said, Mr. Mason, nice to meet you again. It was Mr. Mason, who had been there, the one I had declined a dinner invitation from the other day. As I was lost in thought, he appeared, and I quickly stood up to attend to him. He said,
Is this lady beside you your mother?
At his question, I nodded. We had talked about the wheelchair the other day, but I hadn't mentioned Mom's condition, being mindful of her feelings. To make sure it wasn't true, I told him about her dementia where she couldn't hear.
I see.
He said. He then crouched down to my mother's eye level and spoke to her with a smile. It might have been a while since my mother had spoken to anyone other than me, her caregivers, or doctors. Because of that, she seemed to enjoy the conversation very much.
Please continue to get along well with my son.
My mother said. She might have forgotten who Mason was while talking. I was about to correct her immediately, but
Of course, it's my pleasure.
Mr. Mason replied. In his words, I felt that he was indeed a wonderful person. Afterward, my mother was called by a nurse, and Mr. Mason and I were left alone. Thank you very much for allowing that conversation with my mother earlier, I said to him. He replied,
Don't mention it. By the way, Leo, there's something I want to talk to you about. Could you make some time for me next week? Whenever is fine.
I had no idea what he wanted to talk about, but yes, understood. I quickly responded. He said,
Thank you. I'll be waiting for your call.
and left with a bow. Afterward, it occurred to me to wonder why Mr. Mason was here. Was a member of his family in the hospital? I was a bit puzzled. The following week, on my way back from another client, I stopped by Mr. Mason's company. After obtaining the documents for the joint project, I was about to leave, but Mr. Mason said,
Excuse me, the real purpose is coming up now.
and urged me to sit on the couch. He continued,
Ordinarily, I wouldn't want to poach someone like you, but I wanted to tell you something.
However, I couldn't immediately understand the meaning of his words. I asked, puzzled. Seeing my reaction, Mr. Mason began to speak more specifically.
In fact, I used to be a caregiver. Then, the business I started as a side job succeeded, and now I'm the CEO of this company. However, what I really wanted to do was to open my own nursing home.
Since his company had nothing to do with caregiving services, I was surprised by that fact. However, that day, I felt like I understood why he had been at the hospital. Astonished, I answered, Is that so? Mr. Mason continued.
I can finally realize that dream, and the facility will be completed next spring. I wanted to talk to you about working together at that facility. I'll be blunt, but don't you think that your current workplace doesn't understand about caring for your mother?
Had my boss said something to him? It seemed that Mr. Mason had seen through my situation at work. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply said yes. Mr. Mason spoke to me further.
Caregiving, even for a cherished family member, can be incredibly hard to incorporate into one's life. Even though family is important, it's natural to want to take care of oneself as well. Neither is the right answer. They're both correct. However, you unhesitatingly chose your family. Not everyone can do that. Having seen how your mother has been lately, I could tell how much heartfelt care you've been giving. I want to work with someone who has that kind of warmth, and I want to support people like that.
I had never cared for my mom to get recognition from someone else, but I had never been told something like this before. It felt like something inside me was melting. I was truly happy. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I murmured, I'm sorry, and looked down. Mr. Mason gently said,
It's okay. Tears are honest. Don't hesitate to let them flow.
He kindly smiled and handed me a handkerchief. He then shared humorous episodes from when he was a caregiver and spoke about specific details about the job.
You'll be leaving your current job, so of course, your salary will be more than what you're making now. And naturally, there'll be bonuses, but I'll create a system where you can leave at regular hours.
That alone would have been enough, but what attracted me the most was that I could have my mother live in the newly established facility. It wouldn't be free, of course, but with an employee discount, it would be significantly reduced. And I could see her face every day, so both my mother and I could be at ease. There would be staff on site at night, so I could have time for myself. Mr. Mason considered not only me but also my mother in his proposal. There was no reason to refuse such an offer. I expressed my gratitude to Mr. Mason, which words could not convey, and went home to tell my mother about it. I thought she might not want to live in the facility. However, she was so moved that she cried.
All this time, I thought I was burdening you. Thank you so much. I want you to live your life and be happy.
My mother probably had many farts inside her heart that she never expressed. There were initial fears about the new lifestyle, but this new life has brought happiness to both my mother and me, I feel. There are many people of my mother's age and even older in the facility, and my mother is delighted, saying,
It's like spending every day with friends, and it's so much fun.
It seems to be much more stimulating than spending time just the two of us at home, and since moving into the facility, the progression of her dementia has almost stopped. Seeing my mother living joyfully every day makes me happy too. And I'm thinking of marrying a woman I met through a friend soon. I want her to meet my mother on my mom's next outing. I think my mother will surely cry tears of joy again when that happens.